1. Annexation assertions.
People in Canada liking becoming our beautiful, cherished 51st state.
Falsely claimed the Canadian public likes the idea of becoming the 51st state, which the Canadian public overwhelmingly opposes. Canada, America's 51st state. Not so fast. In a bizarre twist of political fantasy, some US commentators, and even certain public figures, have falsely claimed that Canadians secretly dream of becoming the 51st star on the American flag. Seriously. While this might make for a juicy soundbite south of the border, it couldn't be further from the truth. Polls and public sentiment show that Canadians overwhelmingly reject the idea. An Angus Reid poll found that 88% of Canadians oppose any notion of joining the US, with only a fringe 7% open to even discussing it. Fiercely proud of their sovereignty, maple syrup, and universal healthcare. The notion is less dream come true, and more bad sitcom pitch, with most Canadians laughing off the idea like a moose in a hockey jersey at a 4th of July barbecue. 2. Trade deficit deception. Falsely said the US trade deficit with Canada is $200 billion.
It's been very tough to deal with over the years, and it's not fair that we should have a $200 billion or $250 billion deficit.
Though it is nowhere close. A trade deficit with Canada. Not even close. Here's a whopper that deserves a place in the Hall of Statistical Infamy. The claim that the US has a $200 billion trade deficit with Canada. Reality check. Totally false. According to the US Census Bureau, the actual goods and services trade balance with Canada has frequently swung into surplus, not deficit. In 2022, the US actually had a $28 billion trade surplus in services, and only a $37 billion deficit in goods, which nowhere near adds up to $200 billion. So where did that figure come from? A calculator meltdown? A very bad guess. Either way, it's a serious question how such an inflated number could be used, when the facts are just a click away. The real trade story. A balanced and mutually beneficial partnership, not economic Armageddon. 3. Tariff, tall tales. Claimed Canada is one of the world's highest tariff countries, though it is actually low in global rankings. High tariff.
I've been asking CEOs for the last day and a half, what do you do with 25% tariffs? And now it's going to be, what do you do with 50% tariffs? What's going to happen to the market?
Here's a serious question. If Canada is supposedly one of the world's highest tariff countries, it isn't. Then where does the US stand? Especially when it comes to tariffs on Canadian goods. Let's break it down with real data. The average US tariff on Canadian imports is about 2%, according to the Office of the United States Trade Representative. Canada's average tariff on US imports, also around 2%, nearly identical. In specific sectors, US tariffs can go higher, such as on dairy products, where tariffs can reach over 20%, and steel and aluminum, which faced 25% and 10% tariffs during the 2018 dispute before being rolled back in 2019. So, when claims are made that Canada is a tariff villain, the facts suggest a different tune, more like a lullaby of low tariffs and mutual trade. Both nations operate with relatively low tariffs, especially compared to the global average of around 9%. Let's put it this way, no tariff wars, just trade truths. And Canada is far from a high tariff outlier. 4. Dairy duty distortions. Falsely claimed Canada hiked its dairy tariffs during the Biden administration, though they haven't changed since Trump's first presidency. Canada's dairy tariffs remain unchanged since the Trump administration. Claims that Canada increased its dairy tariffs during the Biden administration are incorrect. Canada's dairy tariffs, which can reach up to 300% for certain products exceeding import quotas, have remained consistent since the implementation of the Trump's United States-Mexico-Canada agreement in 2020. These tariffs are part of Canada's supply management system, designed to stabilize domestic dairy markets. No changes to these tariff rates have been made during the Biden administration. 5. Agricultural export exaggerations. Falsely claimed Canada generally doesn't take US agricultural exports, though Canada is the world's second biggest buyer of those exports. That claim. Totally false. And here's why. Despite what's been said, Canada is actually the world's second largest buyer of US agricultural exports, not a country that doesn't take them. In 2023 alone, the US exported over $28.2 billion worth of agricultural goods to Canada, accounting for roughly 15% of total US agricultural exports globally. Among the top US agricultural products exported to Canada are fresh fruits and vegetables, grains and oilseeds, meat and dairy, processed foods and beverages. In fact, Canada consistently ranks just behind China as the largest destination for US farm goods, making it an essential market for American farmers and producers, not the reluctant partner some claims suggest. Verdict: far from shutting the door, Canada is a major customer, helping support hundreds of thousands of American agricultural jobs. Any suggestions otherwise? Pure fiction. 6. Banking ban, blunders. Falsely claimed Canada prohibits US banks, though more than a dozen US banks are operating in Canada today. That claim? Totally off the mark. And here's the truth with receipts. It's been falsely claimed that Canada prohibits US banks, but in reality, more than a dozen US-based banks currently operate in Canada, and have for decades. Some major US banks with a presence in Canada include JP Morgan Chase, Citibank, Bank of America, Goldman Sachs, Wells Fargo, BMO Harris, bank subsidiary of Canadian BMO, but US operate in. These institutions operate under Canadian regulatory frameworks, just as Canadian banks do in the US. It's part of a mutually beneficial cross-border banking relationship, supported by free trade agreements and financial treaties. Fun fact: according to the Office of the Superintendent of Financial Institutions (OSFI), there are over 40 foreign bank branches and subsidiaries in Canada, with a sizable chunk from the US. Verdict: the notion that Canada prohibits US banks is simply false. US banks are not only allowed, but are thriving in Canada under a well-established regulatory system. 7. Maritime myth-making. Falsely claimed Canada is constantly surrounded by Chinese and Russian ships, though this is fiction. Fiction alert. Constantly surrounded. Not even close. It's been falsely claimed that Canada is constantly surrounded by Chinese and Russian ships. But in reality, this statement belongs more in a spy thriller than in the real world. Here's the truth. Canada's vast coastlines, the longest of any country, are monitored and secured through a combination of NATO partnerships, NORAD cooperation with the US, and Canada's own capable Navy and Coast Guard. While there have been isolated sightings of foreign vessels in international waters, particularly in the Arctic region, there is no credible evidence that Canada is constantly surrounded by hostile fleets. Fact check. Canadian defense officials report no persistent presence of Russian or Chinese naval forces near Canadian waters. Incidents involving foreign ships near Canadian territory are rare and closely tracked by the Royal Canadian Navy and NORAD, in coordination with the US. Bottom line: this claim is pure fiction. There is no constant encirclement of Canada by Russian or Chinese navies. The only thing surrounding Canada most days: peaceful oceans and friendly trade partners. 8. Political ploy, pretense. Falsely claimed outgoing Prime Minister Justin Trudeau was using the ongoing tariff battle to run again for Prime Minister, though Trudeau clearly wasn't running. False alarm: Trudeau's exit versus tariff fiction. It was falsely claimed that outgoing Prime Minister Justin Trudeau was leveraging the ongoing US-Canada tariff dispute as a political tool to run for re-election. However, this assertion is completely unfounded, as Trudeau had publicly announced he was not seeking re-election and had already initiated the process of transitioning leadership within his party. The facts: Trudeau confirmed he would step down at the end of his term,
I intend to resign
signaling a shift in
as
Liberal
party leader,
leadership.
as Prime Minister, after the party selects its next leader.
There was no campaign, no rally, and no bid for another term, just a clear path to exit. The tariff battle with the US was being handled by Trudeau's administration in the normal course of governance, not as part of a re-election strategy. Reality check: tariff disputes do not equal campaign tools, especially when the alleged candidate isn't even in the race. Claims like this serve more as political noise than accurate analysis. Trudeau wasn't running, and this narrative wasn't either. 9. Defense spending disinformation. Falsely claimed Canada spends less than 1% of gross domestic product on defense, though NATO figures showed it was an estimated 1.37% last year. It was falsely claimed that Canada spends less than 1% of its gross domestic product (GDP) on defense, painting the country as a NATO freeloader. However, official NATO data tells a different story. In 2023, Canada's defense spending was estimated at 1.37% of GDP, a notable increase from previous years and well above the 1% mark falsely alleged by the numbers. According to NATO's own annual report, Canada ranked mid-tier among member countries for defense spending, investing billions in its military to support international commitments. While Canada still falls short of NATO's 2% target, the claim of less than 1% is clearly inaccurate and misleading, underselling the country's actual contributions to collective security. 10. Fentanyl fabrications. Falsely claimed that fentanyl was pouring in through the Canadian border. It has been falsely claimed that fentanyl is pouring into the United States through the Canadian border, creating a perception of a northern drug pipeline. However, official data and law enforcement agencies contradict this narrative. According to U.S. Customs and Border Protection, CBP, the vast majority of fentanyl seizures, over 90%, occur at the southern border with Mexico, not the northern border with Canada. Since 2023, CBP reported less than 1% of total fentanyl seizures took place at the northern border, with the majority occurring at legal ports of entry in the south, often smuggled in by U.S. citizens. Canadian law enforcement also reports strict controls on fentanyl trafficking, and cross-border cooperation with the US remains strong. The claim of a fentanyl flood from Canada is not only unsupported by evidence, but it also diverts attention from the real source of the problem and undermines effective strategies to combat the opioid crisis.
Sinaloa cartel and the Jalisco or CJ&G cartel, both cartels in Mexico, are responsible for the vast majority of fentanyl that is coming into the United States.